All right, folks, thank you for joining us tonight for an atypical event, an appreciation, where we're going to learn a bit more about one of the JES's founders, take a trip down memory lane, and get to enjoy several different things. If you received an email from me earlier this week, I think I said an inspiring talk, brilliant and beautiful music, and delicious drinks and merriment afterwards. Those are the three things that are going to happen tonight. And that's all going to happen around the Reverend Charles Brock, one of the JES's founders. I'm going to ask a few things, housekeeping-wise, before we get into tonight's program, which features several different elements to it. One, I'm going to ask you to join me and take out your mobile device and put it on silent or airplane mode, out of courtesy for tonight's presenter, as well as our performers for tonight. I'm also going to ask you to be mindful of some of the literature you might have received on the way through. As someone who once taught in front of a room full of students, I know how eager students can be to read anything that they're immediately handed. I'm going to ask you to keep your attention up here on the stage for the next hour or so, and then we can turn over to materials, more of which you'll get afterwards. My name is Ben Sveg, and I'm Vice President here at the JES, for those that I've not had a chance to meet yet. And I'm here to introduce tonight's presenter, and really, I can think of no one better than Dr. Andrew Roth to help guide us through tonight's appreciation, a celebration of the life and legacy of Reverend Charles Brock. Dr. Roth, you know him for many hats that he wears at the JES. He's really an integral part of our team here. He's a new board member to our board of trustees, and I want to thank other trustees who are here tonight. Our chairman, Dr. Harry O'Shea, Dr. Judy Lynch, I saw. There may have been others. I'm sorry if I'm missing you, but thank you, board, for being here. Mr. Charlie Carl, I saw. I want to thank you for joining us, and Andy's a part of that board. He's also a scholar in residence here, amongst many others who contribute regularly to the body of work that the JES provides to the community. He also directs the Reigning Fellows Fellowship Program here, which is a part of the JES's Civic Leadership Academy. And as if the man didn't need one more title, he's the interim director of the Brock Institute for Mega Issues Education, which we're so happy to have him do that, because of all that Dr. Roth has done, there have been many successes, and I've joked at programs in the past where I've introduced Andy that perhaps the only thing I've ever seen him fail at is retirement. We are so glad that he's done that, and he's here with us tonight. He is also the author of book notes. If you're not already subscribed, we'll help you that. They're wonderful reads that come out weekly. When not working on various projects for us, believe it or not, he does have additional time when he's actually reading or working out or cycling on Presque Isle. And of course, celebrating the beautiful marriage to his wife, the retired banker, Judy Owens Roth, who we're so happy to have with us in the audience tonight. They have 3 children and 7 grandchildren. Tonight, Dr. Roth is here, as I mentioned, to talk about the Reverend Charles Brock, one of the JES's founders who left the JES and its supporters and the Erie regional community with an inspirational and aspirational thought when he died in November of 2023. He left us with a lot of words to consider. These ones I think are particularly important. Work passionately for justice, education, and democracy. Reverend Brock carried these themes through his decades of work as a teacher, a pastor, a lecturer, a leader, a friend, a mentor. Many of you knew him in one, if not all, of those capacities. So I'd like you to ask to join me in a round of applause to welcome Dr. Andrew Roth to the stage as us and the rest of the JES team members reflect on Reverend Brock's life and accomplishments and how the legacy will in fact continue. Dr. Andrew Roth.
And welcome to all of you, Jeffersonians and friends of Charles Brock. Charlie, as I almost always called him, but I was corrected by one of his friends in England who said in England it's always Charles, never Charlie. But we Americans are more informal. The title of the program is Charles Brock, an Appreciation. And I'm going to do something that I never do. Those of you who have been to other of my talks either here at Chicago or at the Jefferson, I never use notes. But today, in order to make sure that we get through the program in time for what Charlie would have called the drinkies, drinks, and for those of you unfamiliar with English culture, a drinks party is what Americans would call a cocktail party or a reception. immediately after this. And so the program itself will take about an hour, I hope, and there are 2 significant musical interludes, and I'll only take up about 40 of those 60 minutes, I hope. And so that's the nice program. And it's an appreciation of Charles Brock, and as you leave this evening, each of you will be given a copy of this, which is a memorial essay that I wrote about Charles, which is essentially the program in the script. So in order to avoid duplicating myself too much, I'm going to follow it fairly closely. So, Charles Brock, an appreciation. As you'll read, an appreciation, the word appreciation has several meanings. One, it can mean a sensitivity to things. Charlie definitely had a sensitivity to life, to beauty, to all the things around him. As his wife Mary, who is right here, as his wife Mary told me, Charles was never bored or lonely. He was always reading, learning, and listening and heeding the people around him. Appreciation can also mean judgment or evaluation. That is, that you appreciate something, you value it. Charles valued a lot of things, his family, his education. But one of the things we're going to learn that he valued greatly is his hometown of Erie, Pennsylvania. But an appreciation is also an expression of gratitude. And this program this evening, and the essay that I wrote for the Jefferson, is an expression of gratitude by the Jefferson Society, of which Charles was one of the founders. It's an expression of gratitude by the board of directors, by the president, Ferky Ferrati, who's in the back of the room, and by all of those who got to know and work with Charles over these last, well, for me, these last 10 years. The Jefferson itself has been in existence for about 15 years. Charles was a lot of things we're going to discover. Sometimes when you were with Charles, it was like being with a crowd, because there were a lot of people there, a lot of facets to his personality. But one of the things he was, and it ties into that comment that Mary made, that he was never bored, he was always learning. He was always planning to learn new things, even at the very end. I'll share with you a project sheet he worked up for himself not long before he died, actually. He just intended to keep on keeping on. As his friend, the Reverend Dr. Colin Thompson wrote me, and Dr. Thompson's more than a friend. Dr. Thompson was a student of Charles's at Oxford. He first met Charles in about 1962 or 63, the first day he was an undergraduate at Oxford. He met Charles and Carolyn, and has become a lifelong friend. And he wrote to me that, amongst a number of things we're going to hear from Colin, of course, through the evening, there was nothing negative about him. Charles's vision was positive, and that's one of the things that was a key characteristic. He was always positive. His enthusiasm was catching, his eyes focused on the future and the need to plan for it now. Charles was, if nothing else, a passionate person who brought passion and enthusiasm to everything he did. I met Charles some years ago at a Friday lunch group called, well, we called it a lot of things, but Charles called it, Charles was one of the founders, he called it the Notorious Nine, and it's a group that meets actually to this day, every Friday for lunch at the Erie Club. He was one of the founding members of it. The other thing that Charles and I had in common, of course, is this thing that we're here tonight, the Jefferson Educational Society. And the other thing that Charles and I had in common is a love for Erie. I'm not a native Erie. I always joke I've lived in Erie for 54 years, going on 55 years, and when I die, the paper will begin by saying I was from somewhere else. But Charles was an Erie guy. As Janet Grossman, his friend, told me, he was an Erie guy. And for those of you who aren't Erie guys, that's high praise from an Erie person. That's actually high praise from an Erie person. It means you've remained grounded or rooted. You haven't given in to any highfalutin notions of yourself that you might have picked up elsewhere in your perambulations around the world. His close friend, his lifelong friend, Tom Hagen, told me, and I think this is a really insightful comment about Charles, that Charles was a common man with an uncommon background. And what Tom meant by that is, and that brief trumpet fanfare is Aaron Copland's fanfare for the common man, is that Tom didn't mean that he was common in some derogatory sense, I guess. What he meant was that Charles never lost his spirit of everyman, and that he was open to everyone, that he never took himself particularly seriously, although he took a lot of things seriously, he didn't take himself particularly seriously, and that he remained rooted in the community from which he came. And that's a theme that is going to come back throughout this next hour. One of the things he loved is he loved ethnic Erie. Charles once told me in Erie, and this is true, sometimes Erie, what's the famous line? Whoever discovered fish can be fairly certain it wasn't, whoever discovered water can be fairly certain it wasn't a fish. Sometimes Erie'ites don't recognize about themselves the richness, the diversity, the cultural and ethnic richness of the community they live in. Charles once said to me, in Erie, you can meet people from everywhere. And one of the things he took a great delight in doing is going to all of the ethnic festivals. And in fact, one of his oldest friends, the screen seems to be eating the red dot because there it is. One of his oldest friends is Ron DeVecchio, who was a classmate of his at Strong Vision High School. Ron, of course, is the impresario of the Italian festival in Little Italy every August. Charles also never lost sight of his West Virginia roots, which some people may not be entirely aware of. His father, Ralph Roth, came to Erie in the early 1930s and played professional baseball for the Erie Sailors, and he met Charles's mother, Arlene Zern, Ami, and they were married in the early middle 30s. Unfortunately, they separated when Charles was 5 or 6 years old, but Charles never lost contact with his father or his Brock family in West Virginia, which partially explains his fascination with bluegrass and country music, which caught some people, or could catch some people who didn't know that part of his background, slightly off guard. Tonight, we're going to have Jim and Pat Cuneo come forward, and they're going to play two of Charles's favorite songs. Excuse me. John Denver's Country Roads and Bob Dylan's May You Be Forever Young, which of course is one of the traits of Charles. I actually once joked with him, Charlie, you're 88 going on 18, but that would be another discussion.
Thank you, everybody. I'm Pat, and this is Jimmy, a great musician. We were very fortunate because I knew Charles as Charles, but Jimmy and I got to know Charlie, who loved blues and, country music. He loved bluegrass. He loved sophisticated music, and he loved shit-kicking music, which is what we were. Still are. He loved West Virginia, of course. So please sing along with us, as Charlie would like it. And it's so great to have Mary here, Mary right here. Charlie really loved Mary. I don't know if he broke into song at their wedding, which had us all on the floor, as I recall. Almost heaven, West Virginia, Blue Ridge Mountain, Shenandoah River. Life is older than the trees, younger than the mountains, blowing like the breeze. Country roads, take me home to the place I belong, West Virginia. Mountain mama, take me home, country road. and dusty, painted on the sky, misty taste of moonshine, teardrops in my eyes, country roads, everybody, take me home to the place I belong, West Virginia. My mama, take me home, country roads, take a journey. I hear her voice in the morning hour, she calls me. Radio reminds me of my home far away. Driving down the road, I get a feeling that I should have been home yesterday. Yesterday, country roads, take me home to the place I belong. Country roads, take me home. Country roads. This next song is a special song. I kind of think, I don't know what you think, Jim, here. I think Bob Dylan was channeling Charlie Brock when he wrote Forever Young. Should have been his mantra, but he was a Dylan, he liked all kinds of music. Jim's gonna sing this praise song.
May God bless and keep you always. May your wishes all come true. May you always do for others and let others do for you. May you build a ladder to the stars, climb on every rung. May you stay righteous, may you grow up to be true, may you always know the truth and see the lights around you. May you always be courageous and upright and strong, may you stay
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Pat. They'll be back at the end of the program for a final number. Well, even though Charles spent a lot of time in England, 35 years, and he had those lateral roots in West Virginia, as Janet Grossman said, Charles was an Erie guy. In fact, his friend, the Reverend Dr. Colin Thompson, told me in an email that when he finally got to visit Erie, sometime during the 1990s or early 2000s, he said, I was finally able to see the fabled Erie, because Charles bragged about Erie everywhere it was. And Charles is an Erieite. He was born into one of the more prominent families in Erie. His mother is Arlene Zern. I assume you saw that was his mother. And that again is his mother on her 95th birthday. Arlene was the daughter of John A. and Clara Zern, Charles's grandparents. She was one of 3 children. Her brothers were Melvin and Everett Zern. And of course, Charles's grandfather, John A. Zern, founded Zern Industries. Charles grew up on Seminole Drive, just on the corner of South Shore and Seminole Drive. He was raised by his mother and his stepfather. I'm going to come back to that slide. Carl Noble. Growing up on Seminole Drive, Charles enjoyed an archetypical Erie childhood. Tom Hagen told me the story once that they couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old at the time. They were exploring the cliffs north of South Shore, the cliffs on the bay, and they came upon what they figured out many years later must have been a hydrographic map of the bay. But at the time, Charles was convinced it was a German document, and they spent the next several years of World War II scouting the bay to protect it from German submarines. Charles's cousin Dave Zern, who's here this evening, told me stories about sharing bunk beds at their grandparents, looking for ghosts in the attic and gremlins in the basement. Charles had a particularly close relationship with his cousin Jim Zern. Charles was an only child, and Jim was 3 or 4 years younger than him and had no brothers. And Jim and Charles treated one another as if they were in fact each other's brother and called themselves bro, and those are some various pictures of them. This one here is actually outside the church in Wheatley. That was Charles's church in Wheatley. That's Jim and Jerry Zern, Kathy and Dan Goldkemper, and that actually is Colin Thompson, the gentleman I've referred to a couple of times. And that is Charles's stepfather, Carl. That is a family picnic sometime in I'm giving you the age of Charles in that picture, the late 1940s, early 1950s. Charles, as we said, Tom Hagen called him a common person. If you gave Charles the bare bones of Charles's background, the fact that he was born into one of the more prominent families in the city, that he is a graduate of Carnegie Tech, that he is a graduate of Harvard, that he's a graduate of Oxford, and that he spent 35 years as a Don or a professor at Oxford, fairly or unfairly, a certain stereotype comes up that has nothing to do with Charles. Charles was not that person. He was all of those things, but he was not that person. But he was a great advocate and a great champion of education. He spent his life in education, and if you asked him about his education, he would begin by telling you that he was a graduate of the Erie public school system, that he went to Longfellow Elementary School, that he went to Ridley Middle School or junior high school as it would have been in that time, and that he graduated from Strong Vincent High School, where he was the president of the student council, played clarinet in a jazz band at lunch, and was a member of the Strong Vincent marching band. Along the way, though, acquiring that elite education, if you will, Charles developed a great admiration for John Milton. John Milton, we could turn it into an English class and have a debate, but he's probably, God forgive me, Charles, not in my opinion, but in Charles's opinion, one of the greatest of the English poets. Actually, inspired by Charles about 3 or 4 years ago, I reread Paradise Lost. And I had to tell him at lunch, I said to Charles, I gotta admit, you're right, I'm wrong. I said some Anglo-Saxonism can actually really write. But Charles was a fan of John Milton, not only John Milton the poet, but John Milton the philosopher and John Milton the divine. And John Milton wrote a great deal about marriage. Somewhat ironically, I'll explain that in a moment. Milton believed that marriage should be based on the compatibility of the partners' mutual love and sympathy. Sympathy for one another. Sympathy in the 17th century, though, had a slightly different meaning than it does today. It meant empathy. The ability to see the world as the other sees it, and seeing it as they see it, accept it as they see it. And therefore, a successful marriage, is in short, the two become one without ever losing their own individual identity and integrity. A very fine balancing act that any number of people in the audience can attest to is not easy to do and not easy to sustain. Interestingly enough, Charles's hero couldn't do it. In this one instance, in the event, Charles outshone his hero. Milton didn't do it. In fact, he wrote divorces. He wrote the first defenses of divorce in the English language because of his marriage to Mary Powell was less than ideal. Charles, on the other hand, mastered it. And not once, but twice. In his marriage to Mary. By the way, I took this from Anne Bradstreet. Anne Bradstreet was, I'll turn it into an English class for a minute. Anne Bradstreet was the first forget that. She was the first American poet. She was a Puritan poet. She wrote in 1650, and she was the first quote-unquote American. They didn't use that word then. She would have called herself a New Englander poet to ever actually be published. And she wrote, "To my dear and loving husband." I took the liberty of changing it to spouse because the part I took out of the poem, the rhyme would meter words. If ever true were one, then surely we, I prize I love more than the whole mines of gold or all the riches these that hold. And of course, Charles also had a similar experience with Carol. So in many, many ways, of all the ways in which Charles was rich, that was possibly the most important way. Charles is a man of many facets. He's a pastor, a scholar, a teacher, a musician, a seeker, and a Jeffersonian. When he graduated from Carnegie Tech, he returned to Erie, and this would be now the late 1950s, and he worked for his stepfather, Carl Noble's company called Erie Art Metal, which no longer exists, but they made metal office furniture such as these wastebaskets and strong boxes, which are now collector's items. And as Charles's cousin Jim, who I mentioned earlier, he had a particularly special relationship with, as Jim Zern told me, Charles is very good at math, which some people who didn't know that side of his personality might be surprised by. They knew him as a person interested in literature, history, philosophy, and theology. He was actually, he had a degree in engineering from Carnegie Tech. He was very good at math. And he is actually very good at his job assignments and responsibilities as a young professional in his stepfather's company. But he discovered, as Jim shared the story with me, he got interested in talking with the workers and the laborers, and became interested in their stories. And of course, those fellows had a very different life story than Charles did. And Charles began to realize that he was more interested in their stories than he was interested in the job of being an engineer. Or as his cousin Jim phrased it for me, Charles discovered he was more interested in people than things. And so he pivoted. Well, there was also a second point to the pivot. At that time, he also met Carolyn Dexter, who was the young organist at the First Presbyterian Church of the Covenant. Carolyn was a graduate of Oberlin College, which coincidentally enough, so was Charles's mother, a fellow Oberlin alum. Charles met Carolyn, and Carolyn decided she was going to go to graduate school at the New England Conservatory of Music, and Charles decided, well, he wasn't going to let her leave, and so he made his career decision that he would become a minister. And Charles, being Charles, decided if he was going to become a minister, he'd just go directly to the top. He would apply to Harvard within the school. Interestingly enough, the story of the young engineer who wanted to be a minister so impressed the dean that the dean accepted him and gave him a scholarship. and thereby living the life of graduate students, Carolyn mostly supporting them by playing the organ in churches throughout the greater Boston area. They then lived the life of graduate students until they both graduated. And then the dean suggested to Charles that rather than immediately go get a church, that he should go to Europe and study. That he should go to Europe for a year and study. Since Charles couldn't speak French or German, England it had to be. The dean helped him secure a position at Oxford, where he ultimately earned a master's degree in literature, and also a position at a small United Reformed Church in Wheatley, and that year turned into 35. Because what Charles really is, as his friend, a member of the Notorious Nine, he's somewhere here this evening, I saw him, John Downey said in his eulogy for Charles, his homily at Charles's funeral, to be more precise, what Charles really was a pastor. And a pastor means more than what most people think. John, in his homily, quoted from John chapter 10, verses 14 to 16, I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father. But a pastor also means a number of other things. And in the essay, I don't think I have it up here, so no, I don't have it as a slide. In the essay, I explain the meaning of pastor actually comes from the word, the Latin word pastor, and the old French pastor, which means a herdsman, a shepherd. And it also comes from the Latin root passere, which means to care or to feed. And so a pastor is someone who cares and feeds a flock, but cares and feeds for others. And that's what Charles thought of himself as a pastor. That was true in Wheatley, and that was true at the First Unitarian Universalist Church in Girard. I relate the two anecdotes in the essay. Well, I'll relate one of them now, and the other you can read. In 1965, when Charles was a young pastor at Wheatley, his cousin Roger Zern told me that Roger was in 1965, he had either just graduated from college or maybe was simply summer vacation. He had gone to England to visit his cousin, and arriving in Wheatley directly from Heathrow, and you all know how that is, you're jet lagged and haggard and kind of on a zombie mission at that point until you get some sleep. Well, they had just sat down for some dinner, and the phone rang, and it was a young woman calling Charles, the young pastor. So Charles went, got up and left. And it was a young woman, as they would say once upon a time, who was, shall we say, untimely with child, and she was miscarried. And there was no one in her family who would help. So Charles made sure the emergency services were called. Charles made sure she was taken to hospital, and he stayed with her until everything was secure, because that's what pastors do. They don't make moral judgments, or they don't ask, they just care, and any moral judgments might come later. One of the things that I heard repeatedly, particularly from his congregants in Girard, Dave Ungerman and John Schriever in particular, that was Charles's great good humor. Actually, Colin Thompson talks about how everything Charles did came with a keen sense of humor. Charles had put on the podium at the church this drawing that the Hebrew means, be joyful before the Lord. Charles had a phenomenal sense of humor, and he brought a great sense of humor and a great sense of positivity to everything he did, a great sense of joy. He loved jokes, and he would begin every service with a holy joke. This is one. What did Moses say when he came down the mountain and saw the Israelites worshiping the golden calf? Holy cow. And then, of course, he loved the one that he loved. I've spent the last 6 weeks inside Charles's head, metaphorically speaking. He had a fondness for, to put a delicate shade on it, flatulence jokes, and particularly the famous one about the Earl of Oxford and Elizabeth I. It's in the essay. It's not uncolorful. But as we said earlier, Charles had a rather vast and eclectic interest in music. Tom Hagen told me he'd probably give it all up to be the lead clarinet player in a Manhattan jazz band. I'm not sure that's entirely true, but he was a great aficionado of music, whether it be country bluegrass, whether it be Bach, he loved Bach, whether it be serious, sophisticated music or pop music. With us this evening are Alan Slovinkay and Margaret Andrasa, who are going to perform several pieces for you that Charles particularly liked. As we said, Charles is a man of many facets, many interests. He was above and beyond everything. He was a pastor and a lover of music, but he was also a teacher and a scholar. Somewhere in his The Courage to Teach, Parker Palmer says that the mark of a great teacher isn't what they know, and it isn't how demanding they are of their students. The mark of a great teacher is the ability to share one's passion with one's students so that they too become passionate about the subject. In speaking with Charles's friends, former colleagues, and students, several words continually reappeared: passionate, enthusiastic, exciting, boundlessly optimistic, stimulating, positive, and forward-thinking. Named an Emeritus Fellow of Mansfield College, Charles taught at Mansfield College, Oxford for 35 years, served as chaplain of the college for 33 years, as Director of Ministerial Education and Ordination Studies. He also guided the formation of young Congregational United Reformed Church ministers. Among his Oxford colleagues, Colin Thompson said he had profound things to say, but they were always laced with a keen sense of humor, stimulating and exciting to listen to. Tony Lemon said he's a wonderfully lively, outgoing personality and a great sense of humor which allowed him to relate to those, as we learned in Erie, far younger than himself. John Creaser said his expansive intellectual horizons and enthusiasms inspired literally generations of students. When Charles returned to Erie, he began to teach at Penn State Barron, and at Barron he founded the Institute for the American Dream that we'll come back to in a moment, and the Public Policy Initiative. But he also taught a number of courses, including Comparative Religion, Religion in American Life, and Thought and Introduction to Islam. At Barron, one of his closest friends, who was also a member, not a founding member, but a very early member of the Notorious Nine, John Gamble. John said, a towering, versatile intellect, a nice guy, friendly to almost everyone, but you'd have to know John to really get the almost there, but with an iron core of principles. Dean Baldwin said, endlessly curious, and Kathy Dahlkemper, former congresswoman and former county executive, who team taught a course called Mega Issues in America with Charles. Kathy said, Charles brought reality to the project, youthful and forward thinking. His passion was contagious, his energy palpable, and his love of teaching so very apparent. The Mega Issues course that Kathy is talking about, the topics were fairly large, and just real quickly, there's more in the essay about it. Charles's mind, the mark of a really bright person is the connections they can create. And people will tell you frequently that the mark of a really bright person is the quality of questions they ask and the connections they can make. And obviously, the more you know, the more connections you can make. And Charles would come up with some really, I used to tease him, they were Baroque, but then when you stop to think about it, you go, oh, that makes sense. So daily discussion topics in Mega Issues in America was discuss the easy topics too. Discuss Lincoln's aims and compromises in the Civil War. Examine his second inaugural regarding God's judgment on America. Analyze Ike's, that's Charles Everyman's personality coming out because Ike would be President Dwight Eisenhower. Analyze Ike's view of the military-industrial complex for our time, today. Or one of my favorites, our college is failing the nation. It's one of my favorites because I spent 50 years in colleges. Our college is failing the nation. Or the culture of violence, look at the guns, God, guts, and warlike ethics. One of his colleagues at Barron told me Charles had a great enthusiasm for tackling the big questions. He was not afraid to tackle the big questions and to try to connect his education and the students' education to current events in order to make it meaningful. Charles was also a scholar. He wrote 2 books, Mosaics of the American Dream and a short booklet, but I actually think this one, in my own personal opinion, this one's his legacy, but we'll talk about that maybe later or at another time. But he wrote 3 books, The Holy Warrior Presidents, which has not yet been published. The Catholic, in the sense of universal, that's what the word Catholic means with a small c, the universal sense of Charles's interest is revealed in even the most superficial glance at the over 75 talks, papers, and presentations he delivered here at the Jefferson Society. He did an 18-part program on probing education. His attention spanned from amazing ancient universities to Isaiah Berlin, historian of ideas, to Cheney University of Pennsylvania, the oldest black college in America, to Harvard and Benazir Bhutto. Among other talks, one finds Charles never straying far from his deep commitment to American spirituality and religious values. Jefferson and Lincoln on Passover and Good Friday, which quite frankly is not one I would have thought of. Jefferson and Lincoln on Passover and Good Friday. Religion and politics, Washington, Lincoln, and the power of providential deism. Mysticism, politics are central to great American hymns. D.H. Lawrence, who scolded that he needed to get cracking with your definition of God, and Obama, the mystic. Many of Charles's lectures, however, were reflective of his deep commitment to foundational American values, which is one of the things Charles and I agreed on, and both have been doing tons of research. The nature of the American story, the nature of the American narrative. What is the American story? Turns out there are two versions of the American story, and they are been in conflict almost from the beginning. And without turning this into a lecture, you didn't come to hear. That conflict explains most of our current contemporary politics and culture wars. But Charles did a lot of work on that, and even at the very end, just last year, 2023, he gave 3 talks. Thank God for Jimmy Carter, white supremacy and Christian white nationalism. Over the years, he spoke on topics as diverse as the gardens of Monticello and Little Italy, Jesus Christ, Redeemer, Reformer, Revolutionary. The one I really liked was Religion and Politics, from Sarah and Hagar to Sarah and Hillary. You gotta think about that one. Charles's main scholarly interests were 3: religion, the American narrative, and preserving American democracy. In terms of religion, Charles and I would often talk about it. Now, I didn't have his background. And I made the comment to him once. I said, you know, Charles, that all of the world's, strike me, that the world's dominant religions, the largest religions, many of the world's religions, they all essentially say the same thing. They preach the same ethic. It's some variation of do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And yet we're killing each other over secondary and tertiary characteristics about how we might exactly phrase that, or how this group might choose to actually celebrate it in this group over here. And so I said to him, I said, what we need to do is to find a religion that scraps all of that stuff and just gets down to the core. And he looked at me and he said, you're a universalist and you don't even know it. So then I had to figure out what a universalist was, so that set me off on a 3-month campaign, or try to catch up with Charles. In any event, his last book is a benediction, in which he attempted to do exactly what we were talking about, to weave all of that together. A benediction is a liturgical act, these are Charles's words. A benediction is a liturgical act viewing chief symbols of 8 world faiths. We make connections between faiths and tolerance and understanding, and to seek common causes for personal fulfillment, freedom, and justice for the world. And then he turned that into an actual liturgy, in which, as Charles explained to me, the infinity symbol expresses that God is in and beyond the universe. Brahman is the all-encompassing divinity of Hinduism. Yahweh encompasses Abba, the name that God used for Jesus used for God, and Allah. Kuan Yin is the Indian and Chinese goddess of compassion. A round rice cake symbolizes the oneness of all things. As Charles put it, the world is a huge place. It is full of wonders. We must value and use them all. His mosaics of the American dream linked the American narrative, or the American story, around the notion of the American dream, but also our biblical founding. As he quoted Lionel Trilling, America is the only nation that prides itself upon a dream and gives its name to one, the American dream. Charles was worried that we had corrupted what that means, and we agreed, and his book talks about it, that it actually encompasses all of those things that people think of. It does, in fact, encompass wanting a better material life, wanting the better things in life, having the opportunity to succeed. But it's also more than that. And as he pointed out, our civil holidays, each one of them has a biblical root. Each one of them speaks to a biblical issue. And many of our founding ideals come from the Bible, in particular the Old Testament. But he was really worried about what would happen to the American dream, that Americans had lost sight of what John Winthrop meant in his famous sermon, A Model of Christian Charity, which you're probably looking at one another and like, what famous sermon, A Model of Christian Charity? It's actually the City on a Hill sermon that John Winthrop gave in 1630 in Massachusetts Bay that has actually been corrupted. When John Winthrop said we shall be as a city upon a hill, he didn't mean, oh, look at us, aren't we this nice shiny thing, aren't we great, which is how that has been used. No, what John Winthrop meant and what Charles and I have talked about and what Charles talked about in his book is, John Winthrop was a Presbyterian, Puritan, divine, and a lawyer. What he meant was that as a covenanted people, we would be exposed to the eyes of God. If you actually read the sermon, A Model of Christian Charity, we will be exposed on a hill to the eyes of God and to all our fellow humans, and they will know, God will know, if we are true to our values, if we are true to what we meant. That's what the phrase, a city on a hill. And what Winthrop meant was, and as he says in the sermon, we must brotherly love without dissimulation. We must love one another with pure heart. We must bear one another's burdens. We must not look only on our own things, but also on the things of our brethren. Because as Charles points out in his book, The Mosaic of the American Dream, what Winthrop meant was society only prospers if each individual in society prospers, and individuals in society can only prosper if society prospers. It's both and, not either or. And that's the essence of the American dream: liberty, equality, and opportunity. And I won't turn it into a political discussion. We are living in a moment where those values are under assault. Because you take them for granted, but not everybody takes them for granted. Roth Institute for Mega Issues was designed, Charles's hope was that it would keep the discussion and the struggle to preserve those values alive and vibrant, because Charles believed in education. He spent his whole life in education. And the way you keep those values alive is that you educate for an educated citizenry and you program for an educated citizenry so they'll understand the issues. Because Charles, we're back to his hero, Milton. That's Milton as a much younger man. Milton believed the purpose of an education is to fit a man, it's the 17th century, okay, to fit a person to perform justly, skillfully, and magnanimously all the offices, both private and public, of peace and war. In other words, the purpose of an education is not to earn money. It's not to learn how to earn a living. In fact, in my other life, running colleges, I could always tell students that the purpose of an education is not to learn how to earn a living. If all we ever teach you is how to learn how to earn a living, we fail. The job is to teach you how to learn how to earn a living, because that's not inconsequential, obvious statement of the obvious, but it's only part of education. Our job is to help you learn how to live a life and how to do a values-based education that would help someone learn how, and that's what Charles meant, and that's what Charles's hero, Milton, meant. And the most important part of your, not the most important part of your life, but a very important part of your life was to learn how to be an educated and aware and participating citizen, because as another of Charles's heroes, Thomas Jefferson, said, if you can think you can have a free country and an ignorant people, you are wishing for that which never was and never will be. Jefferson said it better, that's a paraphrase. Charles talked about that in his last speech when he received, one's the wrong verb, when he was recognized for all he had done for the Jeffersons before with the Dignitas Award. He talked passionately about the need to preserve that education. And we at the Jefferson will attempt to try to do that, because as Pat Cuneo, who's going to be back up here in a moment, said, Charles could be fierce, a fierce defender of democracy, of decency, a fierce pursuer of the truth, of justice, of fairness, defender of freedom, defender of liberty, defender of the American dream. So in closing, before Pat and Jim come back up, I will actually take the liberty of reading this rather quickly. Charlie was a common man with an uncommon background, to quote his friend Tom Hagen, who reigned true all his life to his multiple loves, his deep faith in the unity of all things, the people in his life, Mansfield College, his hometown of Erie, and to American democracy. Of the many things about Charlie Roth to appreciate, his loyalty to those he loved and his determination to never stop working in their defense ranks high. In fact, his wife Mary shared with me a note that he had written back in August of 2022. Is that up here? No, it's in the book. I don't have it here. It's a to-do sheet he wrote for himself. Kid Brock's projects until death's dominion does rule. August 22nd, 2022. All the things he was going to do. As his dear friend Colin Thompson said, there was nothing negative about it. As his Jefferson Educational Society colleague Ben Spagan said, perhaps Charles was such a good preacher because he didn't really preach. He taught. And perhaps Charles was such a good teacher because he didn't really lecture, he listened. He learned, and then he spoke, and then listened, and learned again. The Sparky Karate Jefferson president, who considered Charles a personal mentor, Sparky said Charlie's down-to-earth nature endeared him to everyone he encountered. His approachability and his mischievous sense of humor made even the most complex discussions lighthearted. He had the rare gift of balancing gravitas with a genuine human touch. As his wife Mary Lincoln said, Charles had many sides to him, and his enthusiasm for life extended to all his sides. A great teacher, his enthusiasm lasted to the very end. So as his benediction ends, go in peace, walk in beauty, amen, alleluia.
Well, that was really terrific, Andy. How about a round of applause for Andy Roth? I'd like to call up the Jefferson team, or from now on, the Jefferson Singers. We take you out tonight with one of the songs we used to finish our programs with Charlie over the last 8 or 9 years, and that is, will the circle be unbroken? Because we are a family, and we won't be unbroken. We're so proud of Fergie. He inspired that great cover on the annual report with 1,000 faces of Charlie Brock. Yes. And board members, I know Judy Lynch has a good voice. No, she's not gonna come up. It's key of G, everybody. You'll catch the line on the chorus. And here we go. I was standing by the window on one cold and cloudy day when I saw the hearse come rolling for to carry my mother away. Will this circle be unbroken? I got it. By and by, Lord, by and by, there's a better overweighting in the sky, Lord, in the sky. But Undertaker, please drive slow. For this body you are holding, Lord, I hate to see her go. Everybody, will the circle be unbroken? By and by, Lord, by and by, there's be unbroken by and by, Lord, by and by. There's a better hope awaiting in the sky, Lord, in the sky. One more time. Will the circle be unbroken by and by, Lord, by and by? There's a better hope awaiting in the sky, Lord, in the sky. In the sky, Lord, in the sky.
Another round of applause for Pat and Jimmy Cuneo. As Charles would have it, let us all go enjoy drinkies in the room next door. Join us for conversation. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. We appreciate you.